As we open up chapter 7, you're going to see a new conflict arise for Jerusalem and for the kingdom of Judah here to the south. Because keep in mind, at this time, you have the kingdom of Israel to the north, and then you have the kingdom of Syria north of them, and Assyria is over here in this Mesopotamian region, the Fertile Crescent. Syria is often referred to as Damascus. Israel is often referred to as Ephraim. So what we get here is the Syro-Ephraimite war against Judah down in Jerusalem. So these two countries to the north combine together, their two kings combine, and say, let's go wipe out the kingdom of Judah.
Yeah, the reason is Assyria at this time now has very powerful kings who are trying to invade and take over so they can get access to all these resources. These two kingdoms feel like we don't want foreign powers taxing us and ruling us. So if the three of us combine, we can protect ourselves against Assyria. And the kings in Jerusalem think it's foolhardy and decide not to join the coalition. So Syria and Israel say, well, we really need the resources of Judah. Let's take them on, knock the king out, put a puppet king in that will then join with us to protect ourselves against Assyria. And what we'll see here in the history is that Judah doesn't join with them. The Syro-Ephraimite war turns in the favor of Judah, and eventually Syria and Israel get conquered by Assyria, and Judah is preserved.
So you'll notice the way that this prophecy of the deliverance of Judah from Israel and Syria, God could have just made it really simple for King Ahaz through Isaiah, and he could have said, oh, don't worry about those two, and given them a timeline of when things were going to happen. But you'll notice he used this beautiful symbol to show the deliverance. Verse 14, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And butter and honey shall he eat, and he shall not, or that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings. So a woman's going to conceive, a virgin is going to conceive, or a maiden is going to conceive and bear a son. And before that child is able to know good from evil, these two kings are going to be deposed. They're going to be done. And here's the cool thing. That absolutely applies in Isaiah's day, because Isaiah is going to tell you he goes into his wife and a son is going to be conceived and born. And the neatest part about this symbolic telling of this story is how you can pull it off of Isaiah's time and put it 700 years down the road with Mary conceiving and bearing a son. The ultimate fulfillment of this prophecy. So something that helps a group of people who are really concerned about pending death and war and destruction, they're delivered from that with this promise through the birth of a child. Well, that child, Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, as he's called, and all of the events of 740 to 720 BC, all of these events that have been culminating, those are just symbols, placeholders for the ultimate deliverance from pending death and despair and destruction and slavery and servitude, which comes through the infinite atonement of Jesus Christ and his coming into the world, the ultimate God with us. So you look at chapter 8, and the Lord tells him to take a scroll and write concerning Maher-shalal-Hashbaz. And so he went unto the prophetess. She conceived, bare a son. They named him this name, which means destruction is imminent. Some of you maybe have some children or nephews that maybe you think should have been named Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, because every time they show up, destruction is imminent in your home, perhaps, or in your nursery class or your primary class. Notice how he words this, verse 4. For before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away from before the king of Assyria. Our our good friend, my colleague Byron Merrill, once shared this insight that usually it doesn't matter what language it is. Usually some of the very first words that a young child in that language learns to say or to speak are mommy, daddy, mama, papa, mom, dad, mother, father. Those words in all the different languages are usually some of the very first words out of a child's mouth. And what he's saying here is, before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father, my mother, then you'll know that the riches of these two countries are going to be spoiled by Assyria. It's a way to say, look, this prophecy has a clock ticking on it. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen before this young child is old enough to be able to say that. And depending on the kid, that could be shortly after they turn 1 all the way up until they turn 2, somewhere in that range. So it kind of gives them a calming, it's okay. It's not going to be long now. We don't have to worry about this anymore. So in the rest of chapter 8, you get the beginnings of this Assyrian conquest as this army comes into the region and starts wiping them out, which now leads us into chapter 10, where you're introduced to this whole sequence with the Assyrian conquest. Because by this time, Assyria has knocked out these two northern kingdoms, Israel and Syria, and now they've made their way into the kingdom of Judah, and we're in trouble because Jerusalem, where Isaiah lives, 721 BC, they're being besieged as Sennacherib now brings that full Assyrian army. And these Assyrians, they are brutal.
Atrocious.
They're terribly violent in how they wage their wars.
And you have this list of all these towns and cities later in the chapter that were conquered. And we don't want to paint the blood and carnage. I feel like Mormon not wanting to explain just how terrible the Assyrians were. Of all the years of warfare across human history, Assyrians would be one time period I would not want to be living in.
So you'll notice as King Sennacherib, this leader of the Assyrians, as he gets puffed up and haughty and prideful in all these things that he's done, notice it says, verse 13, here's what he's saying. Behold, by the strength of my hand I have done it, and by my wisdom, for I am prudent, and I have removed the bounds of the people, and have robbed their treasures, and I have put down the inhabitants like a valiant man, and my hand hath found as a nest the riches of the people, and as one gathereth eggs that are left, have I gathered all the earth, and there was none that moved the wing, or opened the mouth, or peeped. Isaiah pauses. You can picture this little prophetic pause here of him considering Sennacherib's boasting. And then Isaiah goes into prophetic mode, verse 15. Shall the axe boast itself against him that heweth therewith? Or shall the saw magnify himself against him that shaketh it? As if the rod should shake itself against them that lift it up, or as if the staff should lift up itself, as if it were no wood. Brothers and sisters, as we look at our own lives today, is there anything that you've accomplished? Is there anything you've done? Is there anything you've learned that you could honestly say, I did that, and God didn't help me with that? I did that. That was my own doing. I would hope that the answer to that question is no. I would hope that the answer is a very meek and sincere response of, I have done nothing worth doing. I have learned nothing worth learning independent of God. All that I am, all that I have, everything I own, everything I've accomplished has been done through the means of God helping me and providing ways for me to accomplish those things as He uses you in His hands as an instrument to do various things. Let's not be that chisel or that paintbrush or that tool, that hammer that says, look what I just built, without acknowledging the fact that it was the Lord God of the universe who was holding us in His hands the whole time, shaping us and then using us to do those incredible works, whatever they may be.